I am very much one of the least artist-like artists out there. And that's kind of a weird phrase. Like, what does that even mean? Well, simply put, if one was to observe me and then everyone else in the art world, I'm very much off on my own. And this is the point where many would sarcastically go, like, sure, as if I'm not self-aware or feel some sort of need to be special. But let me break it down for you. And if you're not an artist, some of these might not hit as hard as they would for any art people watching this. Like, for example, I don't typically sketch as part of my creative process, which for most of you watching sounds like a pretty harmless phrase. But trust me, every artist just gasped in horror or disgust or something, because let me tell you, art is very much an institution with its own holy set of rules and procedures, with one of its main things being to sketch out ideas. Like, every artist has either a sketchbook or a tablet that they use to draw digitally that they just seem to have on them at virtually all times. And every time a project is started, one of the first things that is done is to get out the sketchbook or tablet and proceed to draw. Now, I will say that it's not like I don't own a book of blank paper that I could use as a sketchbook, nor am I saying I have never done any form of sketching either. But I will say, and this will absolutely floor any artist watching this as well, and seem meaningless to everyone else, when I do sketch, I prefer graph paper. And I'll finish going over this whole sketching thing right after I also include this next bit. And that is that I also don't make mood boards as part of my creative process. And for all the non-artists, that's something people make to kind of get an idea in their head of the vibe of whatever it is they're about to design should have. Which basically most of the time is just a collage of pictures of various things that have similar energies. And to me, it seems kind of pointless. Like, it's kind of wild that you didn't know what the vibe you were going for was, but managed to go out and explicitly gather things that match the vibe that you were planning to go for already. Like, isn't that a little bit weird? And by now, artists watching this are probably already writing a comment about the process work, which is what both sketching and the mood board fall under, and it's the art equivalent of showing your work in math. And the shorter version of this, generally speaking, is you first make a mood board, and then you just sketch out a bunch of ideas regardless if you think they're actually going to be good or not. You kind of just want to get them down. And then you make some more detailed rough drafts of the ones that you like. And then you make more finalized versions that you then tweak to get the final result. And now, before the artists actually post their comment about the importance of the process, let me just say that I acknowledge that it is useful. It's just that for me, going through like the whole process in very defined steps just kind of doesn't work. Like, I won't make a mood board before I start, but while I'm working on it, I might grab one or two reference images just to check some things. And as far as starting out a project by sketching goes, I find that when you're thinking of ideas, generally, your first 1 to about 3 or 4 ideas are going to be solid ones. And then the rest of the time in that sketching session, you're kind of just trying to make things that aren't those first few designs to get something different, even if you kind of know in your head it's not going to really work. So for me, I'll just kind of start and get those first few ideas, and I'll pick the one that I think is going to be the best and start fully working on that one. And then as I'm working, I'll try out some alterations to see how they look compared to what I was already going for. And then I'll just stick with the one that I think is better. So I can say that at least I definitely typically will do some iterations. And as far as any lack of ideation is concerned from not doing as much sketching, like I said before, typically when you start thinking about something, the first few ideas are going to be the best ones, and then you're just going to be forcing things just to be different. And I find that typically like 1 or 2 days after I reach a stopping point with a project, I'll then suddenly come up with a really good idea out of the blue. Like, the way I can describe this is like when you're trying to force down ideas in one longer sketching session, it's kind of like looking for something that you lost. It's like you're never going to find that thing when you're actually looking for it, and then you give up, and then like randomly sometime later you're just going to be going about your day, and then you'll just find the thing you were looking for. So like after those first few ideas, I'll be looking for another good idea and I won't be able to find it, but then after I stop working on something for a few days, I'll just randomly think of a good idea out of the blue. So that's why I don't really do the whole sketching thing at the beginning, because I'd rather start working on those good ideas and kind of see how they go. And then when I come up with another good idea randomly sometime in the future, I can then incorporate and explore that one as well. And that's just what works well for me. I'm not saying that anyone else should do it like this, but that's just how I do it. And when I say typically, I mean like, because most projects that you work on are going to be on the smaller side. like working on a logo or a business card or a brochure pamphlet, are on the more smaller side. But then when it comes to something like laying out and designing something like a magazine or something else of that kind of scale, because there's so much to it, it's faster and better to actually just kind of sketch it out roughly, or like do more rough drafts to kind of see the whole thing roughly as it would look, as opposed to trying to do each bit in a more finalized way. And like in animation, I guess the equivalent would be like storyboarding, but I'm not going to be storyboarding this or any other video I make because I don't need to. Like these videos and the quote-unquote animation in them is much more simpler than an actual like animated cartoon or movie. Like with those, there's so much going on and so many movements and details and stuff that you are better off making rough sketches first to see kind of how it would look like. Whereas here, it's just a bunch of more defined still frames that last a few seconds and aren't really filled with motion or anything. And also, if we look back, I never said that I don't ultimately ever do these things either. Like if we go back and look at what I said I don't make mood boards and sketches as part of my creative process. So if it is something that I would probably be better off suited having those things for, but I didn't need to do them as part of my creative process initially, I will just go back and make those things retroactively, and no one will be none the wiser. And again, that's just how I typically do things. And when it comes to like the actual going about making things, that's kind of why I see myself as sort of an anti-artist. And there are a few more, I guess, more trivial things. Like another reason is I actually hate art museums and art exhibitions, where most other artists will typically at least find art museums at least bearable and will actually enjoy art exhibitions. All dependent on the actual type of art and subject matter, of course. But as far as I'm concerned, art museums, like a lot of other types of museums, are boring. And again, it kind of comes down to more personal preference of what you find interesting. Like there are things I do find interesting in a museum setting. But you'd think as an artist, I would like art museums as well, but no. And it's not like there isn't any art that would interest me, it's just often the art there is to see at a museum will not. And this also holds true for exhibitions as well, along with the additional fact that exhibitions and other events tend to be more lively social settings. And kind of on a similar note, another thing is I don't really look at other artists' social medias either. Now, it doesn't help that I don't really use social media to begin with, but if I did, I probably would have the same issues with it as art museums and exhibitions. I probably wouldn't be interested in basically most of what there is to find out there. But there's also another reason that I at least like to tell myself, which is that I don't want to have my work influenced by other artists because I want to be more original than not. Also, another social thing is so many artists say that they are introverts, but let me tell you, they're absolutely not. Like, they have social tendencies similar to every other type of person out there. Like, they do go to social events, they do go to parties and go out and whatever else. Like, I am actually an introvert. Like, I don't go to any of those things ever. And like, let me just clarify, not just for the artist, but everyone else out there who claims to be an introvert. Most of you, just because you don't like talking to strangers, doesn't make you an introvert. But when it comes to disliking things, I will say that I am in the same boat as a lot of artists, which is we do hate Adobe. It's just that the reason why most artists hate Adobe is not the same reason why I hate Adobe. Like, you don't like Adobe because you don't like the money you have to spend on the subscription model, which I also hate. But you are not the same as me, because I hate Adobe because I actually hate the UI of their apps. And because I hate it so much, I've never actually used Adobe as my main software. Back when I was in high school and I started to get into graphic design, I tried Adobe Illustrator because that was obviously on the school computers, but I also got a pirated version of another program called Affinity Designer. And so I just tried learning both of them at the same time, and I found Affinity Designer to be way more easier to understand than Adobe Illustrator, and so I've just been using Affinity's products ever since, which most of the time is Affinity Designer, which is again the competitor to Adobe Illustrator. And they also have Affinity Photo, which is obviously their version of Photoshop. And they also have Affinity Publisher, which is their equivalent to Adobe InDesign. The only place where it falls short is in quantity, because those are the only 3 applications that they have right now. So they have Affinity Designer to compete with Illustrator, they have Affinity Photo to compete with Photoshop, and they have Affinity Publisher to compete with InDesign, but they don't have anything to compete with the other important apps from Adobe, like After Effects or Adobe Premiere. And I'm personally hoping that the next thing that they work on is making a competitor to After Effects, because that's still the only thing from Adobe that I have to use if I want to do something like that. Because at least when it comes to video editing, I actually use DaVinci Resolve. and I'm completely fine with it because its free version is really robust, and it works with and can export files in the MKV format, which is just a more advanced file format that actually compresses the video about like twice as much as MP4. So like an MP4 file of the same video will be twice as much size as the same video in an MKV format, which I personally love to save space. And you don't lose any video quality either with MKV. And funnily enough, Adobe Premiere is not compatible with MKV. There's a lot more I could go over that would set me apart from the rest of the art world, but I don't feel like going into it. And also, as far as I'm concerned, this video was long enough already, so no more, it ends now.